Thanks to years of watching crime shows, I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on what it takes to solve a case. Not that I'd be a good detective or anything, but I do know that you're supposed to look for evidence, interview suspects, and piece everything together to form an airtight case. The new game RICO, on the other hand, has a slightly different approach to solving a case. We don't dust for prints or check surveillance footage because these cops are ready to kick down the door and shoot everything standing in the way. It's a violent shoot first and ask questions never approach that honestly seems like the wrong message to be sending right now, but the random levels and intense action sure is fun. If you're looking for a deep story from RICO, then you're gonna need to go somewhere else. This is an action game that sets a RICO agent up against the mob with explosive results. The goal is to go from level to level looking for evidence. And by evidence, I mean you basically shoot up apartment complexes, seize a bunch of documents, and then get out of there before you go swimming with the fishes, if you catch my drift. If you manage to make it out alive, your reward is to jump into another tense firefight where you search each room in hope of stomping out the mafia. While RICO lacks in story, it more than makes up for in replayability. This is the kind of game where the levels are random, and when you die, you have to start over from the beginning. While I know this subgenre has its detractors, I think it works well here. The random levels and objectives help keep each session fresh, even when you're essentially doing the same thing every single time. The office buildings, construction sites, and mob hangouts are all nondescript buildings, and I like that I never know what I'm getting myself into with each new case. Now the buildings may change, but the objectives and obstacles stay the same. At first, it's all about smashing down doors and killing gangsters, but there comes a point where you'll need to take out certain targets, destroy computers to open up doors, and even defuse bombs. It's these explosives that end up causing the most damage, because not cutting the wire in time will kill you and your chances to crack the case. This is easily the most frustrating part of the game, since we're given very little time to track down several randomly placed bombs. It's just too easy to walk into the wrong room, get caught up in a lengthy firefight, and then not have enough time to locate all the explosives. One missed wire cut and it's back to the beginning. And this is ultimately the biggest sin of RICO. It's not just that it's sometimes hard to track down the bombs, especially on higher difficulties, but rather that the game is filled with cheap deaths. With so much going on and enemies coming from all sides, it's common to take a lot of unnecessary hits from enemies that should be easy to kill. Part of the reason for this is because there aren't a lot of things to hide behind and use for cover. We have the advantage of a few seconds of slow motion going into each room, but things can quickly spiral out of control, even if you have a good plan of attack. The way I tend to judge this type of game is by whether or not I want to jump right back in after I die. In the case of RICO, I was ready to have another crack at the bad guys. Part of the reason for this is because you're always earning experience points that'll unlock new perks that'll carry over between sessions. But the main reason is because I just had a lot of fun. Even when I felt like I died in a cheap or unfair way, I was never so salty that I didn't want to just jump right back in and play it again. I kept wanting one more crack at that case, even if that meant staying up way past my bedtime. Apart from the bombs and occasional cheap deaths, the game also suffers from a few troubling technical problems. I ran into a couple of sessions where I couldn't actually solve the case because the mission didn't want to give me enough evidence to find. The good news is that you can always play a different mission to get around the buggy levels, but this is something the developers are going to need to address. I also found that the game was incredibly repetitive. While the action is certainly fun, RICO doesn't hit a lot of different notes. It basically just does that one thing over and over. Don't get me wrong, that one note is great, but there were times when I wanted a little bit more variety. Thankfully, there are secondary missions that'll want you to get a certain amount of headshots, kill people while sliding, and other challenges. Those help to keep things fresh, but the one-note action still becomes monotonous over time. Complaints aside, there's a lot about RICO that I really like. I'm a big fan of the clean, cel-shaded graphics, and I think that it brings a style that keeps the violence from becoming too gritty. I'm also a big fan of the co-op multiplayer modes, and can see friends spending a whole lot of time cracking these cases together. And I can't forget about the weapons and upgrades I can buy throughout the mission, allowing me to customize my guns in a lot of exciting ways. The truth is, there's so much about this game that I dig that I sometimes forget about the occasionally buggy levels and cheap deaths. And maybe that's for the best. With a stylish look and a bunch of randomized levels, RICO is an addictive little first-person shooter where cops race through buildings shooting everything that moves. While it may send the wrong message, it's certainly a fun diversion that is perfect with a friend in co-op. Too bad the fun is occasionally hindered by technical problems, cheap deaths, and a heavy dose of repetition. But if you can get beyond a few minor issues, you'll find an immensely enjoyable action game that isn't afraid to change every time. Hey, thanks for watching our review. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new reviews and features almost every day. Now here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite cop game? Basically looking for a game starring a cop, or a detective, or an investigator, or just something to do with the police. I mean, it doesn't have to be an action game. Hell, I'd probably accept Sam and Max. So let me hear your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're going to finish up the week with a very different type of quiz on Friday. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.